Welcome to today's webinar, which is part of the Resilient Kids and Youth Project. My name is Cherith, and I want to introduce you to Dr. Gavin Brown, clinical psychologist and Gottman certified therapist. Gavin works for Outback Futures as part of our Barcaldine team. So hi, Gavin.
Hi, Cherith. Thanks for having me.
No worries. Thank you for being here. I know you've got a wealth of knowledge to share with us today. Now, our topic for today is 5 tools to help your kids manage their emotions. So to start us off, what are some big emotions and how do they present in kids?
Yeah, so often with kids, we talk about kind of big emotions. And really when we're referring to big emotions, often what people sort of naturally think of is, maybe negative emotions.
Yeah.
But big emotions in themselves are really just emotions that we kind of maybe struggle to label, or we have difficulty actually knowing how to manage those emotions. I think it's kind of a really great term, especially for maybe younger kids, just to be able to kind of clue them into the fact that something's happening for me right now, and it feels really big, and I don't necessarily know what it is. But it can also, when we talk about big emotions, it can also be things like excitement as well. So, big emotions aren't inherently bad in themselves. They're just big and, maybe a bit difficult to deal with. So, yeah, that's the sort of thing that we talk about when we mean big emotions.
And is there like a particular age group or gender group where you see big emotions more often, or like where it's more prevalent?
Yeah, I think we probably think that there is, but the reality is I've seen lots of adults have really big emotions as well.
Yeah, true.
We just probably wouldn't call them that. So I don't think there's a specific age. I mean, there are developmentally ages where, emotions might be kind of more prevalent, particularly related to sort of brain development and hormone release, that kind of thing. So there are some age groups where, perhaps we struggle a little bit more to manage some of those emotions. But yeah, I kind of think there's, unfortunately today, sometimes we see adults sort of chucking a tantrum, basically.
Yeah,
So I think we all have big emotions sometimes, and even just to be able to label them like that is probably helpful, even if we can't identify the very specific emotion that we're having.
Yeah. So drawing back to the kid focus, why is it important to help kids manage these emotions? Like, it seems like it's obvious, but in your own perspective, why is that important?
Yeah, I think emotional regulation is such a key skill, and it's, I think in many ways it's probably more important than a lot of the skills that we teach even in school. Obviously there's really important things like reading and writing, but actually the ability to regulate and manage our emotions and to develop emotional intelligence is a really key indicator of a whole lot of good outcomes later in life. That people who are able to regulate and label their emotions well just do better in a whole lot of areas. They tend to have much more stable relationships. They can tend to be more successful in terms of, work and career, that sort of thing. So it really is a key skill that we need to learn. And I think one of the great things these days is that there is so much more emphasis on that. And I guess sometimes, in some sort of cultures and even, cultures within Australia, people can kind of see, if they're subscribing to this sort of toxic masculinity idea, there's still this idea around, oh, emotions are weak, or emotions are a female thing, and all that kind of stuff. And so some people can go, oh, I don't want to teach my kids about emotions because I don't want them to be, soft.
Yes.
But the reality is the research is very firm about kids who do this and do this well have much, much better outcomes in later life than kids who don't learn how to manage their emotions effectively. So, yeah, it's a really key skill for all of our life.
Yeah, I know when I was younger, I heard a lot about your IQ, intelligence quotient. And it was only as I became an adult that I heard about emotional quotient and realized, wow, it is actually just as important as your level of intelligence in school. It's about learning how to manage those emotions and how to use them effectively in everything you're doing. So.
Yeah, it definitely is. And it's, our world is such a technological world these days. And, kids, at least my kids, are a whole lot better in that space than I ever am. So, some of those intelligences, kids are going to far outstrip sort of the adults, but it's actually this part of emotional intelligence. You can't learn that we certainly can't learn it from social media generally.
No.
You can't learn that from a computer. We have to learn that largely through relationships and other adults. So yeah, it's a really, really key skill.
Okay. So let's dive straight in then. You've got 5 tools for us today on how to help kids manage their emotions. What's our first one?
Yeah, so firstly, it's really about just teaching kids to actually identify their emotions. So obviously, when you're a little kid, you can have these big emotions and you don't have the language to be able to label it. So age-appropriate ways in which we can help young people to be able to identify their emotions. And so there are a few little tools that are available out there. One of the ones that I like is you can kind of get just on the internet, if you sort of Google like emotion faces, there's examples like this one of just little
a great
little
wall hanging to put
posters.
on your wall.
Yeah, totally. Stick it up in your kids' room. Yeah, so something like this just helps them to sort of, look at the faces, and they may not get it right all the time, and they may not understand some of the words underneath those faces. But that's okay. It's starting to pick up kind of how do I think I'm feeling. I mean, the great part about some of this is it might also help kids to identify emotions in other people. If this is kind of what I see on someone's face, what might that mean about how they're feeling? So that's one kind of little tool that's good, especially for younger kids.
When you say younger, how young could you start doing emotions and talking about emotions with kids?
Yeah, I think this is probably like using a little tool like this. There's probably some language. So, I would say maybe kind of 3, 4, maybe a little bit younger, you could start to use something like this. Obviously, they're not necessarily going to be able to read the words, but it might help them just to start to tune into not just kind of what's on their face, but actually what's happening in their body as well. So, when I have this feeling in my tummy or whatever, that might mean that I'm angry, and that's kind of what my face looks like, or something like that. So, so that's one little tool. There's also various versions of the feelings wheels. So generally these are wheels where, like in the middle there, it's divided into, in this case, 6 major emotions. And then it's got lots of different sort of levels of that emotion, if you like. So one of the things that I sometimes talk about with clients is, it's not with my adult clients, is it's not just about identifying an emotion, but it's also about identifying the intensity of that emotion. Yes. So, for instance, I might be, we could look at, say, sad, and I might say, well, I feel upset, which might kind of fit in that sadness quadrant.
Yeah.
I feel upset because, I made a nice lunch for myself and left it at home or something. That might be upset. Or I might be, devastated because maybe, my pet dog, who I really love, is very sick or had to be put down or something like that. So it's not just about identifying an emotion, but it's also about what's the right intensity of that emotion for this situation. And so some of the feeling wheels can really help with that. And as I said, I have one that I use. I really only see adults in therapy, and I work with mainly couples. And often I'm handing over the feeling wheel to my adult clients, particularly probably some of my male clients.
Okay.
And they actually love it. They really love it because it just helps them. It just makes it easier. And it's so interesting sometimes that people can notice that they're feeling something, and they may not necessarily be able to label it just if I ask them. But if you hand them something like this, often, within a matter of seconds, they can kind of go,
They can
oh,
pick it.
that's the one that I'm feeling. So this is a really great tool as well. It's probably for sort of slightly older kids. Some, depending on the particular version, there are some words in there that might be a bit complicated. So, this is maybe around a sort of kind of 8 years old and upwards, depending on their grasp of language and comprehension. But yeah, that's another really good little tool.
Nice.
And there's also a fairly popular one that's used, is one called the zones of regulation, which lots of psychologists
I've seen this one before as well.
use. Yep. And so it's also just another way of identifying for a young person which zone they're in and what kind of feelings might be attached to that. So I guess maybe the slight difference with the zones of regulation is often it's not so much necessarily about naming the particular emotion, but this is a way to kind of identify the zone. And, there's a whole bunch of different emotions that sit under each zone. And there's quite a lot of resources around zones of regulation. So they can also talk about what's likely to be, happening in your body and kind of various energy levels related to the different zones. So, for instance, blue zone is a very low energy level. So it's a way of, I guess, kind of integrating, not just recognizing emotions, but also recognizing what's happening in my body and giving me some language around how I can talk about that, just in a very simple way, and just kind of observationally, to even say to a child, it seems like you're in the red zone right now. Does that seem right to you? What do we need to do in the red zone? And so it's a nice way to kind of draw together a whole lot of different aspects of emotional regulation.
And I think the important part of that as well is that we're not recognizing any emotion as good or bad. It's just recognizing that it is present, and then helping them to recognize that as well, so that we can now move on to the next step, I'm guessing. Is that correct?
Yeah. So our second step is to develop an age-appropriate strategy for helping children deal with difficult emotions. Sure. So as we said, there's some of those different tools are probably useful for different ages. But yeah, in terms of helping children to start to deal with them, there's some interesting research that I came across the other day, which I'm not sure exactly why kind of it had this result, but it suggested that things like play songs can be really helpful to help like babies to regulate. And interestingly, and again, I'm not sure why, that some of those play songs are potentially more effective than lullabies.
What do you mean by play songs? Like the ones like Heads and Shoulders, Knees and Toes?
Yeah,
like
yes. So that kind
ones?
of thing, or like the Wheels on the Bus, all the classics from childhood.
Okay,
so it's those kinds of songs probably help to soothe babies, which is really interesting. For kind of toddlers, really what we want to be able to do is to kind of help them where possible to actually avoid a distressing situation or kind of distract them away from it. And I guess that's really about, obviously, toddlers, sort of 2-3-year-olds, they just don't have the capacity. They don't have the brain development to be able to kind of go through things and regulate afterwards. So as much as possible, if we can, we want to help them to actually avoid those distressing situations, or to try and distract them from it if it's kind of already begun. And potentially help them also to begin to label their emotions. So give them some words and some vocabulary around what you're actually feeling at the moment is a useful thing to do. For older children, it's really kind of, I guess, then a bit of a step up about helping them to not just identify their emotions, but also to start to help them to identify what actually triggered that emotion. So in a sense, why are you feeling the way that you're feeling? What has happened that might have kind of led to you feeling in this particular way? And also teaching them how to manage emotions for themselves. So obviously with younger children, we have to do a lot of that management, with little babies. It's us, when the baby's hungry, then we feed them. When they're, wet, then we change them. So we do it for them. But as they're getting older, then obviously we want to be able to teach them to do it more for themselves. And so how with older children then talking about what is it that helps you to calm down. So, making sure that what it is works for them, because what might work for us as adults is not necessarily going to work for our children. So, going to their room and being by themselves isn't necessarily helpful for every child. So it's really helping the child to think about what is it that I need to be able to kind of calm and regulate myself. And so that's what we want to start to do as kids get a little bit older.
So it's helping them, like I know kids are so good at asking why of everything else and being curious, but it's about getting them to be curious about their own internal, what's going on in me and what do I need to try and address that. So
yeah. Definitely.
That's really good. Do you know, are there any strategies that are negative that we want to try and avoid?
Yeah, well, yes. So in some of the work from the Gottman Institute talks about emotion coaching, which is the helpful stuff, versus the emotion dismissing. And so parents who are emotion dismissing are generally parents who, are kind of saying things like, stop that, if a child's crying, stop crying, or, sort of expecting them to transform an emotion very quickly. So if a child's quite angry, again, the sort of, don't be angry. So it's really, those are the things that we want to avoid, because it can send messages about, this emotion is unacceptable, potentially even for some children, messages about you're unacceptable because you're having this emotion. So we want to, as much as possible, we want to allow and accept emotions as they are. But that obviously doesn't mean that then we let people do whatever, we do. I mean, we all get angry at times, but we know, I can't go and beat up the person that I'm angry about. That's not okay. But it's better if we can have some allowance, some acceptance of that particular emotion. And so it's those kinds of behaviors, anything that allows it to be there, that accepts it and helps the child to manage it in a functional way is good.
Sounds good. So we've learned to identify the emotions, developed some age-appropriate strategies. What's our next tool for helping kids manage their emotions?
Yeah, so our next one really is about being able to teach coping skills. So as you said, we've done that labeling, we kind of recognize it's how do we cope with that? And maybe fortunately or unfortunately, depending on what kind of coping skills you use, the best way that kids learn coping skills is through modeling. So they will do whatever they see you doing. Okay, so
isn't that like any child? They reflect everything we do, whether we like it or not.
That's exactly right, and it can be, we have our friends from the organisation Sober in the Country who do a lot of work around alcohol use in the bush. And so the thing is, if that's what a child sees as this is how I cope, I have a beer, then that's what they will learn to do. If they see an adult, being able to say, actually, I'm not feeling okay right now, I need to go and just have a few minutes by myself, or, do something that's soothing or calming in a helpful way, then that's how we teach coping skills. And so I guess the important thing is, and this is true for all parents, and it makes it really tough on us sometimes, is we're teaching when we don't know that we're teaching.
Very true.
You know, how we cope with stuff. We're teaching in hundreds of moments where we're not necessarily thinking about what is the message that my child receives if they see me coping with emotion in this particular way. And that doesn't, you know, like obviously we want to cope in healthy ways, but that doesn't mean not displaying negative emotion. You know, some people might hear that as, oh, I've got to shut down, you know, because that will teach my child that I'm coping or that I'm resilient. But that's not necessarily true. So sometimes teaching coping skills is when I'm sad about something, I might cry about it. And actually that's okay.
It's part of the journey.
Yeah, that's right. I don't need to stop crying. I don't need to push that down. It's okay to be sad about some things, and it's okay to cry sometimes, or, you know, sometimes if it, you know, depending on obviously the context, sometimes it's okay to shout or like, I'm so angry, if that helps us to release that. But I guess it's really about that important part of thinking about we're always teaching even when we don't know that we're teaching.
Yes. Yeah. Very important. Yeah. I had another thought in there. It's flowing my mind now, but yeah, just definitely that everything they're watching, like everything we do, they watch. But yeah, it's not about numbing or trying to make everything seem perfect and that it's in control. It's about going, actually, there is a time and a place for this emotion. It might not be forever, but I'm going to work on it now. And then, just coping through that as well. So
totally. Yeah.
Yeah. What if they don't feel they have the skills to do that? What's the next step in what do we do there?
Yeah, so one of our other tips is to help your children to develop a growth mindset. And so growth mindset is kind of a really big area. There's lots of stuff around that, but kind of boiling it down to a few important things. A growth mindset is really about adopting the idea that although kind of my skills, my coping may be limited at this time, it's not set in stone. You know, so the crucial word in growth mindset is really the word yet.
Okay.
So instead of I can't do this, I can't do this yet, you know, or I guess maybe sometimes with emotions, sometimes it's this is a really big thing. You know, sometimes I say to my clients, actually, what you're experiencing right now, no one's going to cope with that really well. Yeah. You know, anyone in that situation would be, you know, upset or would not be feeling okay. But it's really about that idea of, okay, not yet. But what that means is if it's not yet, it means that I can learn to cope with this. You know, at some point, you know, and I might need to sit down and think about what do I need to do to be able to cope with this. And that could be a whole stack of different sort of behaviors. It might be I need to change the way that I think about it.
Yeah.
It might be that I need to learn how to calm myself and turn off some of my body systems a little more easier. So there's a whole lot of different ways, but it's really that idea that if I can't do something right now, a growth mindset is I can grow into the kind of person that can manage this at some point, or that can learn this skill and implement this skill when I need to.
So it's essentially allowing them to have grace for themselves as well, going, okay, I got it wrong, but I'm not a failure. I will learn. I will get better at this. And then as parents, they can then help do that journey well.
Absolutely. And there's lots of work in psychology at the moment around the idea of self-compassion. And so it kind of fits with that growth mindset is, I can't do this right now, but I'll be able to do that. And so, you know, we want to teach our children to be self-compassionate. But again, in those kind of teaching moments, we've actually got to be self-compassionate to ourselves as well, because every parent at some point has encountered some situation where they didn't manage their emotions really well, you know, where they didn't respond perfectly. So it's also about, you know, for us, sometimes being able to go, okay, that did not work out so well. But it doesn't mean that because I haven't done it right this time, I can't do it a different way next time. I can manage myself better. I can learn whatever I need. So yeah, that self-compassion is a really important part of this.
And I guess in that as well, it's also including the child within that conversation. So if a parent has recognized, look, I haven't done that well, is it important to share that with the child going, look, okay, I didn't do that well. We will change it different, or not change it, but do it differently next time to really just continue to practice, continue to grow together in a way.
Yeah, because again, that's kind of that modeling part. And sometimes it might be, kind of saying to the child, wow, I was really angry and that wasn't okay that I yelled at you. And we don't want to, we don't want to just excuse that. But part of this might be about helping a child to recognize connection. So we might say, gee, I'm really sorry that I yelled at you. I shouldn't have done that. Actually, some really, bad stuff happened at work today. And, Daddy was just feeling a bit, all over the place, and it's not okay that I took that out on you. So again, we're kind of modeling that emotional regulation and the ability to kind of repair and apologize, which is hugely important.
Yes, very much so. So we've gone through the first 4 tools. We've just got one more. What's our final tool for helping kids manage their emotions?
Yeah, and so our last one is really just to be able to build strong social connections. And so family connections are, incredibly important. And I kind of think they're always important. There's a lot of, we have this kind of mindset that, especially as kids get into adolescence, that sort of, they don't want their parents and, that's not cool and all that kind of thing. But, as a psychologist for many years now, I actually don't really agree with that. I know sometimes that's the message that our kids even send us, but the reality is we need to know that we are connected and that we have safe, secure relationships around us. So those family connections are really, really important, especially through the younger years. They're still important through that adolescence, but some of what that may be sometimes is in adolescence, looking around as a parent, looking around for where are the other adults who actually provide a safe and secure space and, who maybe are doing a really good job of managing their own emotion, and what kind of relationships can I encourage? Similarly with, peers, getting to know the peers of your children is important, because you'll be able to see what those kids are like, and are those kids also giving good examples of how to manage emotion and all those sorts of things. So making sure there's as many strong social connections as possible is a really important place for kids to know that I've got somewhere that I can take this. If I can't necessarily take it to mum and dad, there are other trusted adults or people who can give me good counsel that I can go to.
And is really valued there. I know even as adults, we all do need other people around us to help us manage our emotions and all those challenges that go, especially for parents with raising children and going, I've got these issues, I don't know what to do with this, but then having others who can go, okay, well, this is what works for us, or this is how we're doing it. So not just strong connections for the children to have, but adults as well. So
Absolutely. Yeah, because we need support. So, and other parents, sometimes, maybe even older, like as adults, an older person from the older generation that's kind of, raised kids and has done a really fantastic job on that. Those people can be great supports for us as parents in helping our kids to do this.
Well, Gavin, thank you so much. I have loved listening to you share on this topic, and I'm sure you have so much more you could share that I would love to listen to, but we are drawing it to the end of this session for today. Should any of our listeners want to dive deeper into this topic, what other resources or what other places could they go to find information?
Yeah, so places like the Gottman Institute. So a lot of the stuff on the Gottman website is about relationships, but there's also quite a lot about parenting and emotion coaching for kids as well, which is really, really helpful. Obviously, Triple P, if people have access to things like Circle of Security, that's a great program that comes from a slightly different angle. But there's lots of different resources like that, and there's some resources I think on the OF website as well. So lots and lots of different places for parents to go.
Very true. He's correct. So on our website, we also have a range of resources and past webinars that you can listen into to hear more about that. So outbackfutures.org.au. So Gavin, thanks so much for your time and the information you've shared with us about how to help kids manage their emotions. I know I'll be putting some of these tips into practice. And we hope that everyone here has been encouraged by this webinar today. Stay tuned to social media where we'll be promoting more of our webinars and ways to support your kids and teenagers to bounce forward through tough times. So thanks, Gavin, and thanks everyone for listening.
Thanks, Cherith.